like my class did. So what they did was they didn't see that identify the aspects of the play was a literary genre prompt. Okay. So one of the ways that we will approach every question is we'll say to ourselves always, what, oops, why, where? We'll always ask those questions. We'll start with those three. What, why, where? So we would go, what are the aspects of the play that lead us to draw disturbing conclusions about human nature? Okay, we'd always go, why? Why are they disturbing? We'd be asking that ourselves. And we'd be saying, where do we see this? It's always those kind of approaches that we would take, but in particular, what? And one of the ways that we would prevent a car crash occurring is to say to ourselves, when it comes to writing an essay like that, our topic sentence would always center on the word one. One aspect of the play King Lear is. Now, they didn't do that. They got pulled into the trap. And I will tell you this, guys, and it's really important that you kind of like understand this. The questions that appeared on the commercial mock papers that were out there were two companies did the mock paper. They are not critical thinking questions. They do not align themselves with what the Leaving Cert is doing. And the Leaving Cert, the SEC, are asking you really tough critical thinking questions that are rooted in you demonstrating logic. They're not doing that in the mock papers, okay? And if you go back and look at them, they're nothing like this if you actually look at the types of question, okay? And if anybody wants to type any questions into the chat now, what we'll try and do tonight, right, is I'm going to go through each of the four sections, pick out like approaches that would help you improve, and then like you should, as I'm going through it, ask questions pertinent to that section. So keep your questions now around King Lear at the moment, and then I'll keep up with you in that way rather than going all over the paper. Okay. So what they failed to do here with this question was identify it for what it was. They didn't see that it was a literary genre question, and what they did was they identified the behavior of characters as being okay. The aspect. So they did things like, well, Edmund's behavior, Cornwall and Regan's behavior leads us to draw disturbing conclusions about human nature. So a friend of mine who's a chief examiner corrected the paper, and she came in to talk to them. And what she said was, look, your approach to that question was disastrous because you never actually identified what actually the aspect of the play was that you were dealing with. Were you going to look at characterization? So you would go like one aspect, okay, of the play is characterization. Another aspect is moments of heightened tension. Another aspect is the play's conclusion. Okay, so you'd have to identify the aspect if you're going to get control over this question. They didn't. And what she said was, look, immediately they forced her to make really strong decisions. And one of the decisions she made was, so they went along and they answered on Edmund. And then they talked about Regan and Goneril. Okay. Now, if you stop for a second and think about this, right? Regan, Goneril, and Edmund are all one aspect of the play, and that aspect is characterization. So what she said was she treated any character that they dealt with as being characterization. That's the aspect. So in other words, she said for most of them, they only ever dealt with, even though they dealt with numerous characters, they only ever dealt with one aspect. And that caused then a catastrophic drop in their P marks, because P controls everything. And if they're asking you to deal with aspects of the play and you deal with one, well, then you're not going to do well under P. What's going to happen here, and this is the truth, is the P marks are going to collapse. Now, if they were going to apply the marking scheme in a ruthlessly detached fashion, they would actually bring you down to 50%. You'd be marked out of 50% because you only dealt with one aspect. Okay. Now, if you did that, and they'd be totally in their rights to do it, if they did that, of course, you'd have carnage. So what they would do is they would step in and they would instruct the correctors, okay, you can be a little bit generous here in terms of, you know, do they deal with two characters? We might accept that, but you're never going to give that person a H1. And that's why the H1 rate is so low. People can't read the questions in front of them. So that would be my first tip to you, would be to understand the types of question that they're asking in the Leaving Cert, to go through the questions that they're asking and look at them. And if you don't understand them, go back to the marking scheme, read the marking schemes, because the marking schemes are really instructive. I would say to you guys like that, all of my top tips for English come from my very close, regular study of the Chief Examiner's reports and marking scheme. So that's in the exam advice stuff, right? In order to get ready for King Lear, I'm telling you that you need to go back, read the types of questions that have been asked over the last 5 to 6 years, okay? Not just for King Lear, for everything, right? All of the single texts, not just King Lear, all of the single texts, and read the marking schemes intelligently. Of course, you know nothing about Hamlet or you know nothing about Macbeth, but read the first bit of the marking scheme and see what it's saying, and see if you can identify, is that a literary genre question? Is it a core issues, thematic and philosophical concern question? Is it a language and imagery question? Or is it a tragic arc question? Now, the next question for you then is, what can I do with King Lear in the next 5 weeks to put myself into a strong position heading into the final gallop towards the exams? The most productive time of study for you as students is post-Easter. It's it really is the most productive part of the year. Easter's very late this year. You're going to have to work through Easter. You've got orals coming up and you have all of that, but you're also going to have to work through Easter. But in particular, what you want to do is you want to come out of Easter really strong going into the final gallop so that you're not stressed and you're not under pressure. Now, the easiest way to do that, I would say, is to prepare the play's key 5 scenes, to get those under control and to work on them and to really understand them. And there's certainly something that I'm going to be looking at in detail during the Easter revision course this year in the Institute. I'm just going to turn on the light. Hey Siri, turn on the lights. Okay, so play's 5 key scenes are, I'm just going to run through those. I'm not obviously going to teach them tonight, but the play's 5 key scenes are, well, first of all, the love test. Now, one of the things that they say in the chief examiner's report, the only one that mentions King Lear, is that they are surprised by the degree to which students know the start of the play very well, but they do not know the end of the play. So what I would suggest is that you get all over the 5 key scenes that take us through the beginning to the end of the play. So the most important scene in the opening sequence is the love test. It sets the play in motion. It is the scene that informs us about Lear's tragic identity, which is a type 4 question. Tragedy, do you get what a tragedy is? Okay. So to understand the love test, you have to ask yourself some critical thinking questions about it. Like, in other words, what actually is going on there? The love test, of course, is used to a certain extent, and I really use the word to a certain extent by Shakespeare by Lear rather, to decide how he's going to divide the kingdom. But it's not used by him to divide the kingdom. I think that's very important because the kingdom is divided when we meet Lear. We know that the kingdom is divided when we meet him because in the opening scene, Gloucester and Kent tell us that. They actually discuss it and they say, well, I always thought that Lear preferred Albany. And then Kent goes, yeah, me too, but you wouldn't think it the way the kingdom's been divided up. You couldn't tell who he prefers. He seems to have divided it equally between the three of them. So it's already divided when we meet him. So that begs the very obvious question, what exactly is the love test? The love test, I think, is an expression, a reflection of Lear's deep anxiety and vulnerability. So from that point of view, it tells us that he is a deeply anxious and vulnerable man. He is in decline, he knows it. His reasons for dividing the kingdom are noble. These are all very important character points. He is conferring his strength, he says, or conferring power on younger strengths, which is a very noble impetus. In other words, he's doing it for the right reasons. It just stands out. It's a terrible decision. Like, it's one of the worst decisions that you can make as a king to divide your kingdom. And it's particularly a terrible decision in the context of the Elizabethan view of the world. The Elizabethans view the world as very structured and very ordered, and this would be greeted by an Elizabethan audience with deep anxiety. They would be anxious about what they're seeing. Okay. So Lear divides the kingdom, and he divides it, I think, because he's worried about the future. And then he's faced with the reality that he's about to surrender agency. And at that precise moment, he holds the love test. And the love test is a deeply ironic scene because he uses something that he doesn't understand to try and actually gauge what he should do with his kingdom. Lear has no understanding of what love is. And in many ways, Lear's tragic journey through the play is a journey of trying to understand what love is. My lights are going on and off, I think. So, I have a bulb gone. Sorry, guys. Okay, so He divides the kingdom. It's an expression of his vulnerability, and it's a moment, it's a disastrous decision, and it's a moment of real heightened dramatic intensity, okay? It reveals to us some core truths about Lear's character. He's proud, he's blind to what love is, he's rash. All of that comes out in the love test. It's deeply revealing in terms of the play's key themes: power, love, etc., blindness, insight. It's deeply important in terms of the play's imagery patterns. I would always go at each of these scenes. Now, you need to get yourself quality notes, guys. I mean, if you were at, I'll be giving out this scene summaries again at Easter, but if you were at the Christmas revision course in the Institute, I gave very detailed handouts on the play, and they'd be the handouts I'd be going to, right? But as you prepare each of the scenes I'm about to mention, prepare them through the lens of character, thematic and philosophical concerns, and language and imagery. Okay, so that leads us then to the next core scene, which is Lear's confrontation with his daughters. And I'm treating the two visits to each of their separate castles, and then eventually ending up in Gloucester's castle as a separate scene, or as it's the same scene, sorry, okay? And Lear's confrontation with his daughters is deeply important and deeply significant in terms of our understanding of his character, okay? In particular, the tragic and heroic nature of his character. The confrontation itself is a metaphor for the confrontation with evil. And it's in that confrontation with evil that Lear reveals his magnificence and his strength. He is a magnificent character, and he's certainly somebody who's worthy of our respect. And we really look up to him for that reason. Unlike Gloucester, who shies away from confronting the fiery Duke, do you know what I mean? Lear batters himself in the face of evil. And I think that's very important to acknowledge. Okay. The moment, of course, is, if we think about our three strands, that's character, thematic and philosophical concerns, and language and imagery. That moment of confrontation is very important in terms of those three things. Well, it's deeply revealing in terms of Lear's tragic and heroic nature. It's very tragic. It's very sad. Lear comes to realize almost instantly that his daughters have lied to him, that he doesn't understand them at all, and that he is powerless. And he is forced to confront that in the cruelest and most vindictive and very premeditated fashion by these evil cows. Okay. He then, right, as a result of that, and that's like Lear's character, as a result of that, then, that confrontation, Shakespeare shapes our understanding of love, power, powerlessness, all of that. And then the imagery, in particular, animal imagery, is very important in those moments that get into that. That leads us to the next moment, which is, again, a very Lear-centric moment, and that's the confrontation with the storm. Okay, the storm is equally revealing in terms of Lear's tragic and heroic nature. And out in the storm, we see Lear refusing to bend. Another man broken at this stage, and Lear is broken, would bend. He doesn't. It's deeply, deeply significant because in the storm, during his breakdown, he breaks through and he begins to see now things clearly. That brings us to the next key scene. So that's scene 4 now. Okay, so we're on to our fourth and second last scene, and that's the reunification, or the meeting with Gloucester. He meets Gloucester again for the first time since he's lost everything. And the reason why that scene is so important is it reveals to us, okay, I skipped through the storm there now, but it's a very important scene thematically, very important. It's the play's chief kind of symbolic moment. As a symbol, as an image, the storm is so powerful. And of course, in terms of themes, again, it's power, powerlessness, knowledge, insight, blindness, all of that. That brings him to meeting Gloucester. And why the meeting with Gloucester is so important is Lear shares his understanding of what he's learned with Gloucester and, you know, with us. So the meeting with Gloucester is a very important moment in the play, and you need to get all over that and look at that and see what he's learned. What he's learned is really that the truth is that he's not special. The truth is that he's human like anybody else, and that he's been lied to all his life. So it's very important in terms of some of the play's key philosophical concerns. He also understands justice for the first time. I was beginning to think that justice might be a question this year, but it came up on one of the mocks, so it's very unlikely now, I would say, to be on the SEC, unless they change the wording of it so substantially as to resemble nothing. Nothing that was on your mock paper is going to appear on the real thing, just so that you know, okay? I'd say the paper is finished now. It's the 2nd of March. They haven't printed it yet, so they could change it still if they wanted to, but it's been put to bed. And how I know that is they left the timestamp on the export from the paper from Word to PDF there. One of the years it was a leap year, and it was the 29th of February was the date that they exported it to PDF, getting it ready to be printed. Okay. I also know that on the 12th of March during the lockdown that, you know what I mean, that 5 years ago, that the only paper that had been printed was Arabic that year. Nothing else had been printed. Okay, so we know like that why I'm sharing this with you is that we know that everything that was happening in the world right up to about the 1st of February is very likely to be reflected on your papers. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So that brings us then, he shares with Gloucester his understandings of justice, that he was lied to all his life, that he's no different to anybody else, that he has a newfound humility and acceptance of his lack of agency and power, and all of that's really important. And that means now he's ready. He's absolutely ready. Hi, Matteo. I can't actually, of course, I'll see you on Tuesday, Matteo, but I can't take questions like that. You can type it in, and I'll stop now in a second and read some of your questions. That prepares us then for the final moment in the play, or like sequence of moments in the play, which is the reunification with Cordelia, where he's now can be forgiven, okay, and leading to her death. And the moment of Cordelia's death brings us full circle in terms of the play. We're back to where we began. He obviously, having shared with her his newfound humility, having shown her that he loves her and he understands that, you know what I mean, what love now is, or thinks he does, he is reunified with her. Why does Shakespeare not end the play there and give us the lovely happy ending? Well, he doesn't. And I think why he doesn't is he brings us to the end of the play in order to share with us the agony of his loss. Now, he does that for two reasons, I think. One, it's clear that Lear still has a lesson to learn, and the lesson is something that Cordelia always understood. There's no intellectual formulation can be substituted for truly understanding what love is. Okay. And in order for Lear to understand what love is, he had to suffer. At the beginning of the play, Cordelia refuses to reduce her love to a vapid, empty, meaningless rhetoric. And she says, I'll say nothing. At the end of the play, Lear cannot say anything. He howls like an animal because he doesn't have the words to express the extent of his grief. In other words, like Cordelia at the beginning, he's wordless when it comes to the expression of the depth of his feeling. And that, in that way, the play ends where it began. I think it's a lovely circular narrative in that sense. And I suppose Shakespeare is saying at the very end, you know, that like great blindness and great arrogance and great hubris require great suffering if you're going to be purged of them. And I suppose that's, you know, true of all of us. Like we're all arrogant and blind and hubristic in our own ways. Lear is on a scale that's kind of like cosmic because he's the king, but we're all like Lear, and that's where the play ends, and it leaves us to ponder on all of that at the end. If we go back to my question that caused my students so many problems, we talked about the aspects. This is the critical thinking aspect of the question. Draw disturbing conclusions about human nature, where they went very wrong in terms of their approach to this. And I would say, no, they're obviously, I would say this, but they're well taught, they're hardworking, they're very bright kids. And yet they went wrong here. They all went to, and if you could talk now and I could talk to you, you'd be saying the same thing. They all went to the blinding of Gloucester as a disturbing, you know, moment in the play. Now, what they didn't do was they didn't align that with an aspect. So the aspect there would be a moment of heightened drama. And we see this in the blinding of Gloucester. Once you show that, then you have to say, what is the disturbing conclusion? Now, what they felt was that it was enough almost to just highlight the scene. Okay, that's the disturbing moment. But that's not the disturbing conclusion about human nature. And we go back then to our what, why, where. What is actually disturbing about that in terms of our understanding of humanity? Well, what's really disturbing about that in terms of our understanding of humanity? Now, you should be really thinking about what I'm saying here, because I am telling you now, my friends, the Leaving Cert question is going to force you to answer in this way. It's going to force you to kind of deal with a moment of critical thinking. So what's really disturbing about that in terms of our humanity is that human beings can take great pleasure and joy in the suffering of others. Goneril and Regan and Cornwall, they're not just happy to torture Gloucester in the most disturbing of fashions. They relish it. They hold his eye up and they go, you're not so shiny now, are you? Where is your luster? They actually enjoy it and they get off on it, and we can see that, okay? The moment also shows us, and this is disturbing, that you will frequently pay a terrible price for doing the right thing. Gloucester does the right thing, and he suffers the most inhumane, barbaric treatment for it. And the moment shows us that very clearly. So it's a very tricky kind of wording here, draw disturbing conclusions about the human condition. But again, if you want to prize these questions open, you need to revert to critical thinking stances. What exactly is the conclusion we draw? Why is that so disturbing? Of course, if you are dealing with what, it's going to imply that at every point in your paragraph where you deal with a causal moment, you're probably going to have because. This is very disturbing because it forces us to realize that humans take pleasure in each other's suffering. Okay? And that's what they're looking for. Are you thinking? Now, if you go back and reread the mock questions, they're not doing that. Many of the mock questions could have been answered. They were nearly all universally missing an element that would bring them into the critical thinking realm. In particular, the comparative questions were doing that, but also the single test. Now, too long on single test, but that's kind of classic me. So I'm going to check some questions now. So let's have a look. Can I name the 5 key scenes again? Well, we've done the love test, confrontation with Goneril, storm, meeting with Gloucester, meeting with Cordelia. Okay, somebody typed them in very kindly. What aspects besides characterization show disturbing parts of human nature? Well, it would be, for instance, another aspect of the play would be the ending of the play, the way it ends. It's not just enough that Lear has to suffer. He has to suffer the total and utter loss of the one thing that now gives his life meaning, his beautiful daughter, Cordelia. And of course, why is that deeply disturbing? It's disturbing because it seems to be suggesting that we human beings can never really learn fully without experiencing great pain. And that's very disturbing. Okay. So Anna's saying, how would I study the characters? I would study the characters through the key moments. So I would go through those 5 key moments. Now, remember what I said at the beginning. I'm not preparing you here in the sense that, like, for the end of the year, I'm saying do this right up to Easter. But if you were walking in out of Easter, knowing those 5 key scenes, and when I say know them, like really know them, okay, and then start applying them to the previous types of question, right? And what you'll find is you can answer, well, you'll always have something very, very meaningful to say about any of the types of questions they've been asking. If you had those 5 key scenes ready, you're not ready for the Leaving Cert yet. You still have to mop up the other characters, in particular the minor characters, although you'd have a lot of them done now through those key scenes. But if you notice those key scenes that I mentioned, aside from the meeting with Gloucester, they're not great on Edgar. Okay, those scenes that I mentioned. And they don't deal forcefully enough, I would say, with language and imagery. You probably have to deal with that separately. So the subplot and language and imagery separately. And then in your final kind of 8 weeks heading into the Leaving Cert, I'd be looking at those minor characters and like just making sure I'm very happy with it. How many quotes would I try to include per paragraph or point? Well, so 1 point per paragraph. Now, that's your control. So that's where you're coming in and going, well, what actually is the aspect of the play I'm dealing with? Do I understand what I'm looking at? So if I go to a Lear, I have very few of them, but let's pop to a Lear essay that achieved 100%. Wrong one. That's Macbeth. So it is 100%, but it's not. Okay. So bear with me, guys. Okay. All right. So now she gets 100% for this. What's very interesting with her is, this is back in 22, she understands that she's dealing with a literary genre question. She got that. Okay. So the question was, chaos and confusion are used to great effect throughout Shakespeare's play. This is a difficult one for us to use as a guideline because it was COVID and they only had to do 2 questions. That's why it's marked out of 140, not 200. But she sees what it is. She understands what it is. Okay. So she sees, look, undoubtedly the opening scene is one of confounding chaos, she says. So she goes to the opening scene as being chaotic. So that's her approach in terms of literary genre. Okay. Then she goes to Lear's character. And then she has a look at the storm scene as being the most important in terms of chaos and confusion. Now, she's overwriting okay, because she has more time. But what I've noticed with my students, to come to your exact question, what I've noticed with my students is in a modern answer, working well, what we're working on is a 3-paragraph structure that's very kinetic with the question and very structured. The key thing is you really need a defining topic sentence. So the question last year, I'm going to move on now from Lear. The question last year was on core issues. And the way that you would deal with it is, if I can show you now, I was about to pull up the wrong thing. So if we look at last year's question, which was that core issue question, sorry guys, this is just acting up, of course it is, because I need it. Bear with me. Okay, so this is a core issue question last year, and this is how you should structure your paragraphs. This would work very well for you, okay? So you'd be working like this, okay? One key issue that he explores is, in particular, he does that, and then we see it here, and this reveals. And that's really like what you'd be working towards. And what I'm noticing with my students is they're including 7 moments per paragraph. Sometimes they're very short quotes, sometimes they're longer quotes, sometimes they're just a 1-word quote. But what I'm seeing is 7 supporting points per paragraph. That's what I'm going to count it out in the hour. You have an hour to do this. And what they're putting in is that 7 kind of different supporting points per paragraph, 7 different moments. How long would it be? Alex is saying 6 pages. It's probably a little long, Alex, I would say maybe. Now, whenever we're talking about pages, we're talking about exam booklet, which are much shorter than the stuff you're writing at home. Okay, I'm going to move on from single text now. Okay, for single text, the question, character, theme, question, easier. Well, your question there, Niamh, seems to assume that there will always be a character or theme question. Okay, and like that's not true. So you need to accept that that's not true. You could have a technical question and a character question. You could have 2 technical questions. You could have 2 character questions. You know what I mean? So it's not always true that you will have character or theme. For instance, last year they asked characters and core issues, which was character and theme together. It was more theme than character, even though it looked like character. And then they asked you about the play being optimistic, which was bringing you in large part to the end of the play. Can I say that the love test is a moment of it? Absolutely is. You could absolutely, but the thing is, you could. Hubris isn't an adjective. There, just highlighted on the screen. Hubristic is the adjective. It's a really weird word. Hubris is a noun. Okay. Yes, how we can easily hurt the ones we love most. Fabulous point. That would be your causal moment, but you need all of that. How many connective words should I use totally in a question? I don't understand what you mean, Alex, by connective words, so you'd have to come back to me on that. Okay. Sorry to be rude, but I think by where he meant more, I can't understand the question. Sorry, guys. I know it's hard. I'm just rushing through these now. He was asking me what part of the play the question was asking you to refer to. I don't understand what you're saying there. Sorry. So 7 quotes. I would say, yeah, Eve, around maybe 7 moments in each paragraph where you're quoting for the single text. You know, like you can't be, there's no such thing as being prescriptive about this. If you had 5 to 7, that would be very good. If you had 8, that would be good. If you had 6, that would be good. But like around that, keep all your sentences under 3 lines. Keep all your sentences below 16 words, Tom, unless you're intending them to be longer than that. Like keep them below 16 words. What did I mean by where and when discussing the question? Well, I mean, where do we see this in the play? I never mentioned when, but I mean, you could use it. I said, where do we see it in the play? Well, we see it in the love test. We see it at the end of the play. We see it in the blinding of Gloucester. So my words are what, why, where. Why is always for us when we approach this stuff, it's always connected to the discriminating adjective. So if the adjective says disturbing, we'd always go, well, why is that so disturbing? Like, what is it that's disturbing? And then that leads us always to a because linked to the discriminating adjective. Is that okay? At Easter now, I'll go into how you do this in an essay in real detail. So poetry then, I'm going to zoom through poetry because we are running rather alarmingly low on time already. I would try and get 3 poets done between now and Easter. Now, we're entering into Mystic Meg territory here when you're talking about guessing poetry. But what I would say to you is, surely you got 1 done for the mocks. Surely you had 1 done well heading into the mocks. You all knew that Boland was on the paper, I presume, going into your mock paper. I think Boland's going to be on the Leaving Cert too. I also think, why I don't know, I feel Derek Mann is going to be on, and I feel Tracy K. Smith. There would be the 3 now that I have the gut guttest, strongest feeling about at the moment for all different reasons. And I could be wrong about that. Some years I get it really right spectacularly, and some years I get it less right. I don't think I've ever had it spectacularly wrong, okay? But I think you'd be well served getting those 3 done if you've been working on those. But whatever the case, make sure you had 3 done well heading in to Easter. If you did that, that would leave you with only a necessity of doing 1 more, but it would mean you could comfortably do 2 more, okay, heading into May. You know what I mean? You see, James, like Alex says I'm doing Mahon and Boland. I'm delighted, Alex. Okay. And James says, what about Kavanagh? Now, James, I taught Kavanagh this year and I taught Mahon, but I did say to my class that I felt Mahon and Kavanagh were mutually exclusive. Now, I also said that, and I taught both of them in 23, and they both came up in 23, but I told my class, I feel, well, they're mutually exclusive. Okay. I feel maybe not, James, but look, listen, what do I know, James? What do I know? I mean, the only person who knows this is the person who wrote the paper. Mathematically, you have to do 4 to get them right, okay? The core thing is, in terms of your preparation for each of the poets, what you need to do is, and I'm going to spend very little time on poetry tonight because I'm going to actually, I'll announce it through TikTok, but I'm going to do a full masterclass on poetry quite soon, okay? But if I go to Boland, we'll say for a second, all right? All right. And I'm looking at Boland's poetry. What I would be inclined to do is I would establish for each of the poems core thematic labels. That's the first thing I would do. Like, what are the poems dealing with? So you look at your poems that you've done, and then you look at core thematic labels. You say to yourself, well, relationships, feminism, memory, love, the blending of past and present, right? They're very common in Boland's poetry. The key thing is, in terms of getting your poetry ready, and I have a feeling, like, I'm always looking at the paper and I'm looking very closely at trends in the paper. And there was something that kind of worried me last year, right? And the thing that worried me last year was they asked on Sylvia Plath a question that I think you could argue was unfair. All right. Now they would go, no, it's not unfair. And I would go, I feel it is unfair. If I was standing there having a to and fro with whoever wrote that question, my reason for saying I felt that Sylvia Plath question was unfair is it pushed us to barely, I would say 2.5 poems on the syllabus, right? In particular. And then you're bending reality. So it talked about social concerns. And the SEC actually accepted in the marking scheme motherhood as a social concern. Now, I think that's pushing it a little bit. You know what I mean? I really do. Okay. Motherhood is a human condition, but she doesn't deal with motherhood in terms of maternity leave or things like that. You know what I mean? So I kind of felt that they were pushing it there to a weird area, but this has caused me to do this. One of my students on Tuesday night asked me to do this before midterm break. I'm always asking my students, is there anything you feel you need? And I asked that there recently, and as a result, she asked me to do this. And I think this is something that I will put up on Twitter or on TikTok. Sorry, guys. It's Sunday, guys. I'm a bit tired today. What I did was I went through all of the poems on the course, every poet, every poem. And what I did was I identified, sorry, no. Basically, if I can find the bloody handout. It's acting up for me. There it is. Yeah. So what I identified was for each of the poets, what exactly the thematic focus was for each poem. And I highlighted then the crossovers. So if you look at Boland, because I'm assuming everybody did Boland, you'd want to be aware that Boland deals with violence, domestic life, violence, women, the marginalized women, past and present, memory, history, complexity of the female experience, the passage of time. So we did this, we looked at it, right, for the poems that we had done, and we concluded we were weak on the female experience. So we needed another poem. Right? You need to do this for all the poems. Okay. I think I'm going to make this available up on TikTok. I'm going to see how I can do it. So in future, when I deal with a poet, I'm going to have that up behind me maybe or something like that. I'm going to put up a few TikToks about Boland there in the short while, and I'll make sure that that's behind it so you guys can have a look at it and see how it's working. Certainly at Easter, I'll be making this available to everybody who comes to the course, a more detailed version of it, so that you can actually carry out and I really would recommend you do that, a kind of a trawl through the poets that you've done, and you said to yourself, geez, we haven't done any on violence, that would make you very vulnerable to a disastrous situation if that were the case. So you need to make that happy. Or you need to make that happy. You need to make that right, okay? So let me have a look. I'm just having a look there, a few questions on poetry, and we move on. My teacher's doing Boland, Plath, Dickinson, Tracy K. Smith. So only the women. 1, 2, 3, 4. So she's taking a gamble there. Like there's going to be 2 women on the course on the paper, I would say. Okay, given the number of women on the syllabus, and you know what I mean. Like it's a bad look, especially with 5. When you have 5 questions, it's a bad look if there's 1 woman and all men. So I think that they would probably have 3 to 5, maybe. It could even be 3 women. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, it's a strategy to pursue. I don't do that because I think it's very cynical, and also I don't do it because there's so many amazing male poets I want my students to experience, you know. So do I think Plath will come up? I don't know, Dylan. She came up last year. Do they think about that too much? No. How they behave in terms of, it's really kind of random for them, except they try and reflect the course. So there'll always be an Irish poet. There'll be an early poet. So that'll be Hopkins or Eliot. Okay. If there's a living poet there, they'll tend to put them on if they can. That's Tracy K. Smith. So they'll, like, the sweep of the course would be reflected, but I don't know any more than you do if Plath will be on the paper. You haven't done Boland. Well, I think Liam, she's very unlikely not to be on the paper. I could be totally wrong with that. I would not allow poetry to become a Paddy Power psycho event, you know, where you're gambling on what's coming up. Sarah, then, do I think 5 to 6 poems per poet is enough? Do you mean to study, Sarah? You might just maybe clarify that for me. If you're talking about method for answering, 5 to 6 poems is too many, okay, to answer on in the hour that you have. It's just too many to do the job properly. We work on 3, and I can certainly see how you could argue 4 would be an idea that could work as well. We use 3 per essay. That's our method, and it works exceptionally well for us. Do I think, yeah, I think Hopkins is very likely to appear. It's going to be Hopkins or Eliot. It's a 50-50, I think. That would be my feeling. But he slots into that early situation. Can I show the thematic labels again for, well, that was not for Boland, that was just for 1 poem. So the problem is, this is something I'll be doing at Easter now, but the problem is that I don't have time to go through each of the poems, but like that's just for the poem, The Black Lace Fan. And I do one of these for each of the poems. Okay, I put one of these in for each of the poems and we go through them. Okay, but I don't have time to leave them up for each poem. That's just for one of them. Although those labels appear regularly in Boland's poetry, just to be clear, like they're regularly, like that's a good representative thing. Violence is missing there because it's not really in that poem so much, I would say. It's there a little bit, but not much. Okay, let me see now, just going back to your questions. What is my TikTok? Tasman, I'm a TikTok legend. I can't believe you're asking that question. So it's, I think it's at Cian Hogan English. This moment is a good one. It's very short, so it's hard to pull something out of it. But it's a beautiful poem, but it's very little. It's very difficult to work on it. You know what I mean? And what are you going to deal with it? Am I doing a course in Cork over Easter? Dominic, apparently I'm not. Now, those decisions are beyond my pay grade, but I don't believe I am. I'd love to come back down to Cork, and I'll have a chat with them about that if I can. How many quotes per poem should we use? Again, I would be saying that I'd be looking at a kind of 7 interventions, but very heavy in quotation. Like if you're looking at my students and how they're answering, they're very heavy in quotation. 3 to 4 very detailed poems with the theme, content, and tone and stylistic feature. Alex, that sounds like a really good idea. But remember your topic sentence, it's the question, guys. The question, the question, the question, the question, the question. That's why I am so wary of people putting up H1 essays that are untethered. H1 essays without a question are meaningless. It's the question determines the H1, not the quality of the English. If it was the quality of the English, you just wrote, learn an essay, vomit it onto the page, clear away the carrots, hand it up, and you're done. Okay, so that's not it. If that was the question, if rote learning were the answer to getting a H1 in English, there wouldn't be 800 H1s. There would be, I would say, around 20,000. Teachers doing Boland, Hopkins, Plath, and Kavanagh. Would it be worth doing one of my own? Well, it depends on whether or not, Quiva, you can get access to really high quality notes, but you have your 4 there, so just make sure that they're right. You know what I mean? You'll probably end up with 2, I would say, on the day of the exam. You just don't want to be dealing with just 1, because then you're requiring yourself to be very lucky with the question. No, they're not going to be lenient with anything. If a poet comes up, it's going to be the same level of leniency or not for each poet, okay? And I'm going to move on now from poetry. Is it okay to only know 3 poems per poet? No. It's not, Tony. I'm sorry, my friend, it's not. Because you could technically get very badly caught. Like that would have meant last year that you could have been caught for Plath and you would not have been able to do the question for Plath. You'd have to have stayed away from it. And that's not great, is it? Because it's limiting your choice. I think you need to know basically for each poet my little chart there, and then you need to say, well, listen, for Boland, I need a minimum of 4, say, or for like the syllabus says 6. And I think that's where a lot of your teachers mistakenly get this idea of writing on 6. The syllabus says you should study 6, but it says nothing about what you should answer on. Okay. Sarah says yes, love heart. Okay, thank you, Sarah. Oh, that's David. Oh yeah, thanks, David. Thanks so much. So what David is saying, I'll be teaching an online class, which means that if you're down in Cork, of course, you can come to that one, which is I forgot to mention. I didn't realize that myself. Okay, that's great. 7 to 11 pages on the examination booklet. I don't know, is Alex saying there? I'm not sure. Okay, I'm going to move on. Why does every teacher say that Boland is coming up? Why they're saying it, Mia, is that it's her 80th anniversary this year. So she would have been 80 had she lived. And I think why a lot of people are saying that she's very likely to be on the paper is Trinity renamed their library after Evan Boland. She was a professor in Trinity. So like she's in, the fancy term is zeitgeist at the moment. She's in the air and the ether at the moment. Okay. For unseen poetry, I was also 7 intervention points, or would I do it line by line? Well, you're never going to deal with the whole poem, and I'd have to see exactly for the unseen poem how long the poem was. But like you're going to write for unseen poetry about a page and a half, okay, to 2 pages. You've 20 minutes, so you're not going to be intervening as kinetically with the poem. It's a different thing, okay? But you would walk down, pick the lines that work best for you through the features of style that you see. Do the 20-mark question. And a very good little hack you can do for poetry is you can use the 2 10-mark questions to help you answer the 20-mark questions for the unseen poem. So then with comparative, I'm going to move on now. I gave my teacher a Boland essay. I did 3 poems. She told me to do 4 minimum. You see, but that my paragraphs are good, but very detailed. Sacrifice the 3 detailed poems. No, I don't think that's good advice at all. Because it makes no sense, because the same teacher then, if she met somebody else in this group who's been told you have to do 5, is now vulnerable to the same advice to the 5. The thing is, are you answering the question? You have an hour to do it. And if you're answering the question with 3 poems, really kinetically, now it's very important, like technically speaking, you can still get a H1 with 2 poems. And I showed classes that before. Do you know what I mean? That's not what I recommend. All right. But technically speaking, you can. The thing is, are you answering the question? And if you're answering the question well over 5 pages or so, dealing with 3 poems, you know what I mean, in a very nice kind of like well-packaged response, well, you've done the job. Okay. If you go into a 4th poem, which is entirely a possibility, it means then that your treatment of the other 3 is less kinetic. Now, our method is relentless with the question. This is the way we do it. We are relentless with the question. Now, of course, I'm convinced my method is the best way of doing it. Now, I do believe there's very few teachers hitting the 30% H1 kind of zone. Okay, at 34% H1s in one of my classes last year, right? And there were 7 people got 100% last year, I think. That I know of, right? Now, they're really extraordinary results. So it's working whatever they're doing. I do see what you're saying about the 4th poem, but if you do that, then it means that your treatment of that poem, of the other 3, is necessarily going to be lesser. It really depends on you. It depends on the poems you're dealing with, and it depends on the poet. Like there'd be a very good argument for saying if T.S. Eliot comes up and you're answering on him that you'd only do 2 poems because the poems are so massive. Like they're like a little mini short story. Do you know what I mean? How important is it to work through the poem chronologically? Oscar, I think in terms of your approach, that's a very good way to work through a poem, to show you know the whole poem. You don't have to deal with the whole poem, but show you know the whole poem. Right, I'm going to move out of poetry now and I'm going to go to sorry, there's just some questions about the booking, but I'm sure the Institute will tell you if you phone what you need to know in terms of bookings. Your teacher is doing 10 poems per poet. She said we should write about as many as we can. Yeah, she is, because what your teacher should be telling you, and I'd love to get away from this conversation about the number of poems you should cover, because like if the answer were as simple as like write about more poems and you'll do better, well, then we'd have a very short poetry. Like I think it takes me 3 months to teach my class. And if there's people here from the class at the moment, I'm sure they'd be happy to type into the chat how painful September and October were in terms of learning how to deal with poetry. It takes us nearly 3 months to learn how to answer a poetry question. Okay, we spend so much time on it because they're so technical and they are so difficult, right? And if the answer were simply just write about more poems, I would just have, job done, walk out the door, we've now fixed the problem. Okay. So it's not really like that, is it? It's a critical thinking question. Answer the question, the question, the question, the question, the question. And all this talk about how many poems I have to deal with and all the rest of it, it pushes you nearly always into a avoidance of the core issue, which is the question. It's your failure to answer the poetry question, which begins with your inability to read the poetry question. I can't, like most of you right now, and I know this for a fact, cannot read the poetry question. You don't know what evocative means. You don't know what lyrical means. You don't know what aesthetically pleasing means. You don't know, like with all these question tags that they're using, you simply do not have the skill level necessary to deal with them. And your teachers, if they were focusing on that, they'd boost your marks. So if they're not focusing on that, you need to focus on it. You need to go back to all the poetry questions, look at them, and come up with a viable, response to each of these discriminating adjectives. Okay, next thing then, comparative studies. All right. So there's 3 modes, obviously. Only one is necessary to do because they're all being examined. You really do need to look at those 3 modes right carefully. Okay. And you need to decide which is the one that you're doing in school. I'd be surprised if you're doing all 3. I think the easiest mode is possibly general vision and viewpoint. I think the best mode to work on is cultural context in terms of showing that you've worked hard. And easy and showing you've worked hard aren't the same thing. I weighed it up all summer. What would I do? GVV, general vision and viewpoint, or cultural context? And I went for cultural context. I feel the hardest mode, or I'll put it this way, the most deceptive mode is theme or issue. All right. I think it's kind of a difficult one. What you need to do is, I would say, between now and Easter, more than anything else, is get your comparisons right. Now, I'm going to do a separate class on comparative studies, and I'll work down through it with you. A masterclass on it between now and the summer. Okay. So I will look at, like so far now in our masterclass series through TikTok, we've looked at King Lear and we looked at paper 1, personal essays. I'm going to return to paper 1 in further masterclasses, and I'm going to return to comparative studies. Okay. The core thing with comparative studies is you need to understand that you will get no marks for any paragraph that doesn't have a comparison in it. So if you're writing a paragraph, regardless of the mode, and it's minus comparisons, if you're using this bizarrely outdated term, anchor text, that hasn't appeared in any SEC material for at least 15 years, 20 years, maybe 15 years anyway, you're going to be in trouble. Like, because you're not going to pick up the comparative marks. When you look at a comparative essay, it's almost like a Pavlovian response from the correctors to those comparative moments. So I'm looking here now on the screen at a comparative essay that got 100%. It's poetry. That's a poetry essay that dropped 2 marks dealing with 2. This might help you with your question. This is a poetry essay that got 48 out of 50. Okay, so it dropped 2 marks. It had no introduction to speak of, really, very short, and very short conclusion. And she dealt with 2 poems. Now, she wrote an awful lot. Okay, corrected by the chief examiner, and she dropped 2 marks. So that then puts pay to your teacher's theory that, like, the more poems you do, the better you'll do. You know what I mean? But anyway, in terms of comparative studies, let me see if I can see it here. I don't know where it is. The core thing is that you need to understand what they're rewarding. Here it is. So sorry, guys. She did the split question. Okay. And what I was wanting to show you, because I haven't got this set up. Sorry, no, fellas. As I said, I'm tired. It's Hamlet. Sorry, no. The screen is acting up. So the key thing is, just in terms of how this is corrected, is what they're really looking for are those comparative moments. So if you watch where the ticks are coming in, okay, they're all coming in here, look. similarly, and like, as is the case with. So there, every time she compares, she gets a tick from the corrector. Comparative studies, and this is going to come as a shock to many of you, I'm sure, is surprisingly about comparison. And any method that you're using that suggests you write about one text in a paragraph is going to have nothing written there. Like nothing, unless it's the broken question. You know what I mean by the broken question? It's A and B. So the part A of it, well, if you're dealing with that, you're dealing with one text. But if you're doing the 70 mark question, right? So if you're doing the 70 mark or the 40 mark question, you have to have comparisons in every paragraph to pick up the marks. And that's where a lot of you will go very badly wrong. If you're following this weird kind of method where you're kind of writing about one text and then referring to it later, that's a very weak way to approach a comparative. So what you want is a very clear topic sentence. What aspect of it am I going to look at? What aspect of cultural context? What aspect of the theme of freedom, say, that I'm looking at? What aspect of general vision and viewpoint? Usually with general vision and viewpoint, you'll be looking at things like moments of heightened tension. The ending is really super important for that. What's my aspect that I'm going to deal with? And then my comparisons. Okay, let's see, does anybody have any questions for that? Oh, David's putting in stuff. Are quotes important? So they are, I think, I'll be honest with you. Okay, now this is me stepping outside a little bit of the syllabus. The syllabus is quite anodyne. It doesn't really say much about it. Okay, for all of your your questions, the SEC say reference or quotation. But I think we'd accept that if you're referring to King Lear and you're quoting from King Lear, quoting from it is a much stronger position to operate from. So I would say that you'd have your quotes. The other thing I would say this, in terms of comparative studies, it's easier to prepare it if you know quotes from the text. So to that end, I would immediately download the film script for every single film that you're doing and get your quotes from that. The film script's really handy. It gives you great little notes as well if you look at it, okay? So Conan's asking me there, was it... Oh, sorry. How many main body paragraphs? We work off 3 again. We do 3 for everything. Okay. So we have 3 paragraphs. In the 70 mark question, we have 3. In the 30-40, we have 1 on the 30 and 2 on the 40 with 3 again. That's the way we do it. How many comparative blocks are needed in your essay? One of my teachers said we need to write 5 and another said 3. I just don't know what a comparative block it means, I'll be honest with you. It's probably a term they use that I don't understand. If you could explain it to me, maybe again, I'll come back to it. If you're writing about a similarity between 2 texts and a contrast in the third, would you be writing about the similarity as 1 paragraph and the contrast as another? No, I would always have in the 1 paragraph a minimum of 2 texts. And that the strongest, now I'm going to do a separate thing on comparative studies. And if you come to the revision course, I'll go through it like in real detail. But the strongest comparative moment is layered. And it has at its core kind of a number of things. So when you compare, you need to come back to your topic sentence. That's the first thing. Okay. So we'll just say we're dealing with cultural context and you're looking at religion. So you come back to religion or education. All right. And then you layer it up. So what you might say, the best way to do this would be to incorporate a comparison and a contrast at the same time. And for most people, that's very easy to do. So you go like something like, while education also affects the freedom of this character, it does it in a different way in so much as, unlike the other character, he rejects education. We'll just say, no, I'm just throwing words out. But you get the idea there, where I'm looking at a comparative idea, which is linked to cultural context, like religion, education, whatever it may be. And then I'm going, that's different from, but the same as. That's kind of like the best way to layer up your comparison. And do that regularly throughout the paragraph. The more you do that, the more ticks you'll get from the corrector. Okay, so if you have a paragraph again with like just 1 contrast running through it, you're not going to pick up a lot. If I do the 30-40, are you expected to compare the question about 1 text to anything? No, no comparison in that one because you do what it says on the tin. Is that okay? It's not that one isn't because it's about 1 text. So what you've got to do then is identify whatever the aspect is you're dealing with. Just 1 text. And then you come back then and you compare in the 40. Which one would I recommend? I actually think all things being equal, and that's the key phrase there, the 70 is easier. But Like that student there last year that I just put up on screen, she did the broken one because it was an easier question. So all things being equal, you do the easier question always. All right. Well, look, this question here, I want everybody to think about this question for a second. If you explained one text in one paragraph, 0 marks, no comparison, and then used comparative word, I presume you mean words in the next paragraph and linked it to another text, it's what it means is your script is not going to look like this. So your page, right, is say this is your paragraph now, right? Look at all of these ticks. All of these ticks are coming in after comparative moments. All right. You're going to have blank, nada there, right? And that's terrible if you think about it. That person is out comparing you on that page. And you should think about each page of your examination booklet as a battle for your grade. And each page, each paragraph, each moment you're writing, you want to be picking up marks. So if you approach it in that way, you're not, I would say to you, you're not going to do well. Okay, that's the truth. It's kind of a blunt statement, but I would say it's extremely unlikely to reach a H1 when I say do well. Do I have to compare all three? No, you have to do more than one, obviously. You have to compare just two to be in the zone of comparison. Can you do all three? You can. That's up to you, really. Sometimes, you know, you really need the question and I need to know what your texts are and there's all of that going on. Sometimes we'll just use two and then we'll move on to three. Do we think you should know two modes? No, it's fine to know just one, but know it very well. Okay. What makes theme or issue more difficult, in my view, now listen to me, there's plenty of people who do theme or issue and get H1s and they know what they're doing. The problem with theme or issue is it's more susceptible to a nasty question than, say, cultural context or general vision. So in other words, they can load a theme or issue question with discriminating adjectives in a way that they can't with a cultural context thing. Okay. Now that's too long for me to explain to, but you just have to take my word on it. How is the 30 marker being compared? It's being compared on the question then. You're marked on the question. Okay. Have you actually dealt with the question term? So it's very important, like that you would control it. Let's see how she controlled it. So she's doing cultural context. So this is her 30 marker. So she starts off, now watch. The social position that women hold is crucial to understanding any society. So she's gone in there now with her cultural context statement. Social position that women hold, so women. And in the micro society of Room, the patriarchal structure severely restricts the level of freedom enjoyed by the character Ma. And then she goes in and she looks at patriarchy and then the question freedom, and she simply builds it out then and develops it. Okay. I was told the key moment is like a quotation for the comparative. Is that accurate? But like, how do you really deal with a key moment? So this is the key thing. How do you deal with a key moment without quoting from it? Like, how do you talk about the love test without it using quotation effectively? Like, of course you can. And it's a very simple question to ask yourself. If you were looking at two scripts and one of them dealt with the moment but didn't really support it, and one of them dealt with the moment and supported it. Now, I'm not saying this is the same as single text. I'm just saying that why wrap yourself up in knots about this? Just get a few quotes together. It's simple. You don't have to, okay? But it's going to make your answer look better. And we're in an arms race here. If I do the broken question, do I refer to the text you used in part one? No, you don't. You go to the other two texts. If you read the question very carefully, although there is a typo on last year's paper that nobody spotted, I think, but we'll glance over that. Is it better to do 2 or 3 texts for the long question? It depends on your text and it depends on the question, but I think it's easier to compare on 3. That would be what I feel. Am I doing Sive, Shawshank and Small Things for comparative? No, but I think they're the most popular, and I am looking at putting some notes together on those to help all of you out there in TikTok land. I'll see if I can just find the time because I've loads of time in my hands. Should we refer to multiple texts in one paragraph or give each its own paragraph? I think I've dealt with that now several times. Okay, if you put one text on its own in each paragraph, you're going to do disastrously badly, I would say. Do you have a specific structure in mind? Well, the structure is pretty easy. Controlling sentence based on some aspect of the mode of comparison. We see this in text 1, and then immediately coming in with my comparative moment immediately. How long should each paragraph be? With a comparative text, I would say you're dealing with quite long paragraphs, like 2 pages. We tend to write long paragraphs. I know some of you get very anxious about that, but a paragraph's just an idea. So we tend to put in very complicated, well-supported, multi kind of focal points of intervention paragraphs. Is it okay just to know 2 texts? It is, but what that means, Mr. and Mrs. Darcy, is that you are stuck then with the 70-mark question. And if it's a pig of a question, well, your back's to the wall, isn't it? You're better off with choice, but it is okay. You will be fine. I think if I was just doing 2 texts, I'd do 2 modes, but it might be, that's up to you. I can't really help you with that. What am I teaching? So I'm doing On the Waterfront, I'm doing Medea, and I am doing The Crucible. Okay. Now, if there's anybody here and they're in deep trouble, you can reach out to me. You know what I mean? If you can have a chat with me, or if you're coming to the Easter course, I can talk to you about that. Okay. You switch from theme or issue to general vision viewpoint for the mocks. Well, yeah, that's grand, Alex. I would prefer general vision anyway. It's easier than theme or issue, I would say. For every comparison, does it have to refer to all 3? No, I think I kind of dealt with that. 2 is fine. What are the key moments in Shawshank? Well, I don't teach the movie, so I don't know it well enough to say, and that's something that I think you'd have to have a look at yourself. Where would I find notes that might be making on TikTok? I am going to put up behind me on TikTok the key thematic concerns for each of the poets that I deal with between now and the summer. I'll put it up as a floating thing behind me, but I'm not giving away, obviously, reels of notes on TikTok. Thanks for answering that. The length of the paragraph's okay. Is it too late to swap for comparative? I don't really know what you mean by that. Are you talking about mode or are you talking about texts? Can the length of the paragraph affect your coherence marks? Absolutely not. Your coherence, you've been marked on coherence in terms of, is the paragraph coherent? So if the paragraph is coherent, it needs to be about one idea. What would affect your coherence marks is very short paragraphs that kind of are not dealt with fully. That means then that they are not dealt with properly in terms of the coherence. There's just somebody at the door there. So that would mean, like, coherence means, is it stable? How is it stable? Does it have a core topic sentence, a clear topic sentence? Like she said she was going to look at patriarchy. So that means then, is the paragraph all about patriarchy? If it is, it's coherent. Okay, that's what coherence is. So you're not going to be marked down because you have a long paragraph. Where you go wrong in a long paragraph if you didn't know what you were doing is, and like this would be classic, like I would say, regardless of the length of the paragraph, you would go off topic kind of. Okay. In other words, you start off saying, I'm going to look at patriarchy, and then you start talking about religion. That would cause an imbalance in the paragraph and it not to be coherent. 2 texts in the first paragraph, would I focus on one or balance the paragraph equally between the 2 texts? Again, now I think maybe I'm not being heard here clearly. If you focus on one text in a comparative essay, you're not comparing. And if you're not comparing, the P marks collapse. I really want you to realize that, guys. But I think it's kind of self-evident. Like if you're dealing with one text in a comparative essay, well, then you're not doing what they're asking you to do. You use the 3 paragraphs of cultural content. My teacher marked me down for coherence as he said the paragraphs are too long. Well, I'll tell you what I'll do. Okay. I will hand you, Mr. Walzer, a gift of 100,000 euros if you can point to me anywhere on the marking scheme that it says a long paragraph is incoherent. I would also ask you to have a look at, we'll say, this paragraph. So if we have a look at her here, okay, so look at the length of the paragraph. So she starts with social class. Same paragraph, so a 2-page paragraph. Now she's very dense writing. I would say for a lot of you, that could be 3 pages. Do you know what I mean? She's very small, dense writing. So next paragraph starts here. This is paragraph 2. It runs on to this page and it runs to that page. So each of her paragraphs are about 2 pages. Don't get too hung up on the length. It has nothing to do with anything. It's the quality of the paragraph, and it has that's it. Yeah, Dylan, if you contact me, I have changed the password on my website because it was being passed around on Reddit. Okay. Would I recommend doing a short story on paper 1? I wouldn't really, and we're out of time. Like this is so classic. Okay, we only did paper 2. All right. I'll definitely come back to paper 1. Look, I don't know you well enough, Joey, to say would I recommend a short story. But what I can tell you, Joey, is rote learning is definitely not the answer to the short story. What separates the short story on paper one, say, from the personal essay, which I did a whole class on there, a masterclass on the personal essay, and I did allude to the short story in that class. What separates the short story from the say personal essay, discursive essay, speech, is they're writing the short stories in a way that prevent rote learning. Like what they're trying to do is basically knock out the people who are basically kind of using your strategy for. So let's have a look at the 2022 short story. Okay. I didn't even know if there was one. I presume there was. Write a short story in which the student featured in text 3, Dieter Knecht, has a life-changing experience as he attempts to rescue Joseph Roth's denounced novel Rebellion from the Nazi supporters who wish to see it destroyed. Like, oh my God, that is like a WTF moment, people. Okay? Like, look at the number of discriminating factors they've put into that question to try and ensure that people are not rocking up with a rote learned short story. I mean, it's really difficult. A friend of mine who used to work in the Institute of Education, or a colleague of mine in the Institute of Education, was a published short story author, and he used to always say, I would never do the short story in the Leaving Cert. Okay, I'm doing small things like these, Sive, Shawshank Redemption, and I'm in your grind. Well, that's a question we can talk about in the grind. Like that's something we can talk about at length on Tuesday evening online. So I can go through that. We won't get into the rest of it, okay? Is there anything special we have to do to make a personal essay different to, say, a speech? Yeah, Connor, a personal essay and a speech are completely different. They have very little in common, I would say, except maybe some of the expansion points, but they have very little in common. They're completely different things. I don't know if you have access to I did a full hour on personal essays there recently. Would I recommend the descriptive essay? It's a difficult test, but if you're very good at it, like it's a difficult one to get ready. I certainly would not recommend it in the same way as I would say be very careful with the short story. They just don't always come up tests, so you have to be careful with that. In terms of, look, 2 minutes on paper one. In terms of paper one, what you need to do more than anything else is you need to get your categories of English ready. Okay. And what that means is you need to get all over this. So these are the categories of English. Okay. Information, argument, persuasion, narration, and aesthetic. All of paper one asks you, do you know what they are? Right? Knowing what they are and how to write about them. You need good resources to help you. And if you, at Easter, I will be giving out information, argument, persuasion, and narrative and aesthetic handouts. Okay. I would say with paper one, if you were trying to get ready for Easter, if you got 2 of those categories right, I would clump argument and persuasion together. So if you did argument, persuasion, and narration, if you got those done for Easter, you'd be in a very strong position for paper one. One of the things that shocks me is, and I was in the Institute on Saturday morning in the live class, and I was asking them, how many of you have never really studied those categories? And it was about, I would say, 60 to 70% of the class. And what stunned me about that is, if you don't have those done, you can't deal with the paper. So that's your first port of call. Get those done. Okay. Get quality notes. Get some help with that if you're not getting it in school. Get some good resources, and start working through each of those categories, and then start answering the questionnaires. And then, in terms of getting ready for paper one, you should be deciding now after the experience of the mocks on maybe the 2 types of essay I might look at, regardless of the composition you feel. So say you decide, like for me, I want to do a personal essay, right? Say that, or I want to do a discursive essay, regardless of a personal or discursive essay coming up, they are going to require you to be able to write discursively and personally on the mock paper or on the paper one. So in other words, on paper one, okay, you have to be able to write in a persuasive way, in a discursive way, and in a reflective way between question A, question B, and the composition. So you have to get those categories right. Even if you're not going to do an essay, say, in the composition that is personal, you have to be able to write in a personal way, technically, possibly for question B. Okay. How many expansion points? When we count them out again, we're always seeing around 7 in every personal essay. Now, they'll be tiny. Like a very good one to look at and underline and have a look at it as an example of good personal writing would be the 2021 piece by Nigrifa. It's in, if you look it up, you'll see what I mean. It's an aesthetic writing piece. It's a personal essay in which she talks about her garden. Have a look at how she expands into things like industrial farming. She talks about, Brehon law, literature, things like that. With a personal essay, those expansions are very minor. Okay. Guys, so as always, the best laid plans of mice and men gang awry. I had hoped we'd get through both parts of the paper equally, but your questions, which were fabulous, I think they were really good. Do you know what I mean? They kind of shoved me down different roads. If you're not keeping an eye on me on TikTok, you probably should for future masterclasses. If you are there at Easter, come up and say hello to me and we'll have a chat, okay? And like I'll try and give you everything you need at Easter to take you to May. Do you know what I mean? To make sure that you have a very complete set of notes going into May. Is that okay? You're so welcome, guys. You are so welcome. I hope that was somewhat helpful to you. Thanks for turning up in such numbers, and I'll see you all. I see hands going up. I'll just stay on to the bitter end, but I think we're coming to an end now. You're so welcome. Thank you, guys. Bye. Take it easy, fellas. Bye.
Cheers, Cian. I'll end the meeting.
Okay, thanks, David. Okay,
All right.
thanks,
Cheers.
Bye.